Despite the fact Kurt Cobain eventually publicly distanced himself from Led Zeppelin in his words for the band's lack of respect towards women, Kurt actually grew up a pretty big Led Zeppelin fan. As a matter of fact, one of the first songs Kurt learned to play on guitar was Stairway to Heaven. And in his childhood bedroom on one of the walls, Kurt scribbled the words Communication Breakdown, the title of one of Led Zeppelin's earliest songs. Nirvana also performed various covers of Zeppelin in their early days, including Immigrant Song, Heartbreaker, and Dazed and Confused. What's also interesting and not as well known about Kurt's views on Led Zeppelin and hard rock in general is that during an interview from April of 1991, Kurt actually told interviewer Adam Snyder that he was into hard rock again. The following is from that interview. Quote, "I didn't get back into that stuff until much later. So, when were you reborn as an Aerosmith fan?" Just a few years ago. It wasn't that painful, actually. Before the Nirvana and Pearl Jam rivalry, one of the other notable rivalries in rock and roll was Zeppelin and Aerosmith, at least amongst their fans, who would often argue back and forth over which of the two iconic classic rock bands is better. It should be noted, by the way, that Aerosmith actually inducted Zeppelin into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, but that's a separate subject altogether. In any case, there have been many instances of fans of the two bands arguing with one another, and that, in part, is what inspired Nirvana's tune AERO Zeppelin. At least, that's one interpretation. Kurt Cobain wrote in his journals that the song wasn't actually about Zeppelin or Aerosmith. It's about artists who, in his view, try to sound like them. Here's the quote. "This song is not about Aerosmith or Led Zeppelin. It's about The Cult, Faster Pussycat, Kingdom Come, Guns N' Roses, Whitesnake, and Nirvana." End quote. In terms of the sound of AERO Zeppelin, it's a unique track in Nirvana's catalog in a way. There isn't much in Nirvana's catalog that you could say sounds like straight-ahead 80s style hard rock, but much of AERO Zeppelin does sound like something you'd expect from a typical hard rock band, which I'm sure was partly the point. The intro of the song in particular reminds me of some of the slower-paced heavy metal coming out of England in the 1970s. In any case, some of the song in my view kind of borders on thrash metal. The song in general is about the trendiness of popular music and how artists often just copy whatever is trendy and popular. Some of the lyrics in the song which speak most poignantly to this, in my opinion, are the following. "How a culture comes again. It's a plan of yesterday. And you swear it's not a trend, doesn't matter anyway. All the kids will eat it up if it's packaged properly. Steal a sound and imitate. Keep a format equally." Aside from various live recordings of the song, there are two known recordings of AERO Zeppelin, both of which feature Dale Crover on drums. The first was recorded in Aberdeen at Dale Crover's house on January 3rd, 1988, and the second was recorded 20 days later during Nirvana's first ever professional studio session on January 23rd with producer Jack Endino in Seattle. That recording of AERO Zeppelin with Jack Endino would end up being released on December 14th, 1992 as the 13th track on Incesticide. Now, as mentioned, Kurt grew up a fan of Led Zeppelin, as did the band's future drummer Dave Grohl, who appears in many Nirvana photos wearing a hat with John Bonham's symbol on it. John Bonham having been a big influence of Dave's. As a matter of fact, Dave Grohl has a variation of John Bonham's symbol tattooed on his right forearm and left shoulder. In 2008, Zeppelin's Jimmy Page and John Paul Jones joined the Foo Fighters on stage during a concert at Wembley Stadium in London, where they performed Zeppelin classics Rock and Roll and Ramble On. In terms of how Dave Grohl's connection to Zeppelin began, he recalled the following in 2020. Quote, "It's almost as if I had fallen into a Led Zeppelin movie or something. It didn't even feel real. It all started at the Live Earth benefit that we played in, I think, 06 or 07. It was in multiple cities around the world, but we were invited to play at the London gig, which was at Wembley Stadium, and the list of performers was bananas. It was Madonna and the Beastie Boys, and Genesis and Metallica and the Pussycat Dolls. There were so many artists. And we just assumed that we would be at the bottom of the bill because I imagine, like at most festivals, that the lineup was based on popularity. But when we arrived and saw the schedule, it had us going on after everyone and just before Madonna. It turned out that a lot of these bands had other festivals they had to get to that night. The summer festival season in Europe is crazy, so every weekend is a different country and every country has a different festival. But anyway, I was terrified. And I remember before going on, my manager John Silva pulled me aside and said, "I just need for you to do one thing for me. I just need for you to be better than Metallica." I said that's not going to happen. But we decided since we had only 20 minutes on stage that we would do what Queen did at Live Aid, which was basically play 5 of our most recognizable songs that everyone could sing along to. And as we walked on stage, the sun was just going down, so the lights had just started coming up. And we basically did an abbreviated version of a greatest hits set list. So it was My Hero, and it was Everlong, and it was, Learn to Fly, just the big singles. And in the middle of the set, I jokingly announced to the audience that we would never be back to play Wembley multiple nights. I was kidding. At that point, we had never even headlined a stadium. So about a year later, when my manager asked if we wanted to do it, of course, we had to pull out all the stops. So we designed this stage in the round. I mean, literally drew a picture of the stage on a napkin. It's so Spinal Tap, but it's true. It was just a crude drawing that ended up becoming the blueprint of that show. And then someone asked us if we wanted to have some special guests. So being a Led Zeppelin freak, I've got Zeppelin tattoos, I thought, well, we've got to call John Paul Jones. We had wound up performing The Pretender with him that year at the Grammys, and we made friends, so I figured this is the most momentous occasion of my entire life. Why not call the band that changed it all for me? So I got on the phone with Jimmy Page, and he basically said, well, what do you want to do? And I was terrified to answer. I felt like I was walking in a dream, but I had to say something. So I said, how about rock and roll? So he said, yeah, what else? I said, how about Ramble On? He said, great, see you at rehearsals. I mean, it was that easy. I couldn't believe it. It's kind of a blur, to be honest. I know it's on Palladia or whatever, but I remember the rehearsals the day before when we were sound checking at the stadium. I was so nervous and hungover, actually, and when they showed up, I couldn't believe that finally the moment I had been waiting for, to sit on a drum stool, look to my left and see Jimmy Page, look to my right and see John Paul Jones, was actually happening. Just being 8 feet away from Jimmy Page as he played this classic song and shredded these classic leads is just so hard to explain. It's almost as if I had fallen into a Led Zeppelin movie or something. It didn't even feel real. Their importance to me is hard to explain because I didn't take lessons. I don't understand conventional theory, I can't read music. But listening to those albums taught me so much. It kind of taught me how to learn, so in a way, I almost saw them as more than human, which of course they're not. They're wonderful, generous people that walk the earth as we do, but to me, they just meant so much more that I almost didn't want to impose any sort of personal relationship on them. Although years later, I ended up playing in a band with John Paul Jones and Josh Homme for a while called them Crooked Vultures, which was amazing because then I did become close friends with John. But every once in a while, I'll see a clip of that Wembley show, and I'll remember how I felt running up to that stage. Having 60 or 70,000 people singing Everlong, it was magical. I'm looking out at my mother, my wife, my daughter, my whole family just thinking, this wasn't supposed to happen. This band was never supposed to do this. And I'm so grateful for all the other things in my life, but I'd hate to feel like this was just another show. It wasn't, and it never will be for me. There are some things in life that stay with you forever, and yeah, that was one. End quote. As Dave Grohl mentioned in the quote, he, John Paul Jones, and Josh Homme formed a band called them Crooked Vultures. They debuted this band in 2009, remaining active until the following year, 2010. The band is currently on hiatus. Their debut single, New Fang, won the Grammy for Best Hard Rock Performance. And in 2012, the Foos performed another cover of Zepp's Rock and Roll as part of a ceremony at the Kennedy Center honoring Led Zeppelin. Robert Plant, Jimmy Page, and John Paul Jones all in attendance.